Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you're at, ladies and gents, and welcome back to class with another episode of my Robattle Studies 101. This time around, I'm tackling a very highly requested and very rather confusing and somewhat controversial mechanic that has released relatively recently at time of recording, and that is the new TuneUp system that was implemented in Medarot S as of the 2022 Ghost in the Shell collaboration rerun. Introducing two bots as well as showcasing the new mechanic with the three original ones. Now since then there has been a little bit of controversy around the topic and a very large amount of discussion, as I have been told and have been explained a number of times, and even that I've seen, that the instructions and the overall explanations of how the tune-up mechanic behaves is a little bit unclear. And this episode in particular of my 101s did take a little longer to set up, primarily for me trying to understand it myself, so I felt a little better and more confident in explaining it. But at long last, I have at least a general understanding of how it works, and with that, with this episode of the Robattle Studies 101, I will be covering the tune-up system, what it is, how it works, how to unlock it, as well as a little bit of the controversy behind it for clarification as to how exactly this mechanic works and how far it's developed, even in the short time since its release. With that being said, let's go ahead and hop right into this lesson, Tune-Ups, Improving for Performance. Starting off the docket to explain exactly what is the Tune-Up system exactly. But simply put, it is a system designed to upgrade Medarots that are getting the treatment with permanent buffs to the stats in question that they are being offered to. In addition, you can also earn tune-up points, or TP for short as it's explained, that you can use to redeem for these said buffs. Now these permanent buffs can be things such as boost to heat and cool, to success, to armor, to even leg ability improvements, or even in case of legs, an additional S rank on a terrain or two, or in case of head parts, an additional head charge, depending on the head in question and the bot that is getting the treatment. Now this honestly, at first glance, is a very promising mechanic, as theoretically that could mean everybody could get it one way or the other with enough time, but they have made the system just a little particular in who is able to get the treatment and how exactly the bonuses that they can earn can be redeemed and collected. But moving forward, let's go ahead and hop right into what exactly the new menus that were introduced with the mechanic behave. First of which here is that you see is the usual tune-up menu you will see when equipping a part, as well as distributing the points that you have redeemed to collect and put towards certain upgrades. As you see here, just to kind of make it easy for following, letter A in this case, down in the bottom left, is your missions list. This is where you can see any missions, limited or not, limited or permanent, that you can complete at any given time or within a limited amount of time, so you know what you need to do to complete more tune-up missions and earn more points. Letter B in this case is your tune-up points milestone. Now the way they have this set up to make it more of a feasible reward kind of thing is every 100 tune-up points that a part obtains and receives, not redeems but receives, you can earn a certain amount of upgrade and rewards for this, and I will touch on this just a little bit later. Letter C in this case, on the far right next to the tune-ups themselves, is the reset upgrade option. Now this is particularly what you want to use if you want to redistribute your tune-up points to, say, change up the current build of what you have to something different. And I want to forewarn you with this, and I will touch on it later. This is a very, very expensive option if you choose to go with it. It will cost you 10 rubies to completely reset all of your tune-up points so that you can fully redistribute them into new points. So if you are going to use this option, and I greatly recommend you do not, choose very wisely ahead of time what you're going to aim for so you don't accidentally use your points elsewhere. And then last but not least, letter D in this case on the menu board is simply committing the upgrade. So instead of simply choosing it and making it permanent, the game does allow you to actually to at least simulate and get a preview of what the upgrade would offer before you have a chance to completely commit to it. And in this case, when doing so, this will permanently apply the buff implement in question to the part and commit it permanently until it can get reset back with letter C as before. Now with the missions list themselves, this is the one that was particularly the most confusing, not just with myself, but also with players as a whole, because a lot of missions were relatively unclear or didn't quite explain correctly how to redeem them in particular. But the general overview of the menu is as follows. Letter A in this case, that little filters at the very top there on the left, allow you to filter between permanent missions, which you can complete at any given time with no rush, and limited missions, which will only open during certain events or when certain dungeons are around. And on that topic as well, with the release of the TuneUp parts mechanic, they are also releasing dungeons that cycle every week that can allow for certain bots to further redeem these limited missions. In some cases, such as collaboration bots, such as the Ghost in the Shell collaboration or the Omega Sisters, both of which who have had their tune-up treatments thus far. This can also include collaboration missions, such as for limited EX trials or anything else that may be limited to them. Letter B in this case, at the tick box at the very bottom left, is the include unavailable missions. This is primarily if you want to get a general overview of all the missions available for this particular part to get upgrades from, and what they need to do to complete it, and how many tune-up points they can earn for completing said missions. And then last but not least, letter C here, as you see with the orange buttons on the far right, are simply you can pay rubies to fast track and redeem missions without having to complete them. As you see here, you also have, that can range between 1 and 5 rubies, I'd say, per mission, depending on what it is. Or, if you have the resources on hand, you can also choose to pay the lump sum of rubies at the very bottom left there to complete all missions at once and not have to complete any further. This essentially will allow you to fast track and complete missions that you say can't make or can't obtain or finish, such as limited missions or collaboration missions. Or if you have the resources on hand, like you said, you can essentially just buy them all at once and fast track it and be done. Now, I normally would not recommend spending rubies on something like this if it's something that's easily obtained, but there are some cases as well where fast tracking and buying completion, such as say missions that involve online PvP, where you could honestly do that and it would be well worth the ruby and the tune-up points that you can earn from it. Moving forward as well, the parts list and the team building screens we're also giving shortcuts that allow quick access to the mission screen, as well as general overview of the tune-up collection and completion rate of all the parts on a set, if applicable. In this case here, as of recent, Cross Messiah and Smilodon were both given the tune-up treatment in recent. So as you see here by this fancy new button on the top right next to their heads, this button right here will give you a fast track for a general overview, like I said, of their part completion rate, as well as a quick overview and a shortcut to their missions per part, so that if you want to go into a mission, you know what to try to accomplish. In the parts library, as you see in the second one below with Cross, all the bots that are getting a tune-up treatment will be designated with a small wrench icon next to their next to the name and any equipped chips that you see, as you see here. This is a general way to keep track of who has gotten the tune-up treatment, so that you can keep track, so that you can maybe fast track who you want to look for to have it, if you want to focus on spending a week to do tune-up part missions, or if you just want to keep an eye on who has what. Now with the Milestone Rewards, this one isn't necessarily as confusing, but it is rather grind heavy because of the mechanic. But simply put, as I explained previous, every 100 tune-up points that a part earns, not redeems, but earns is the key word, you can unlock additional rewards. These rewards include ruby shards, cyplasium, and even some power-up chips every here and there, as well as other handy-dandy little bonuses like power-up chips to use for parts, as far as you go. Now, at the very end though, if you can fully tune a part all the way up 100%, in some bots that can be 800 points, with most others it is 1000, there is a very special reward waiting at the very end of your completion as a shiny new reward, and that in particular are limited tune-up skins. Now this red gold with the red, black, and gold color scheme, they have made clear will be permanent in a norm for any models that get the tune-up treatment. So just as a reminder, because this is a skin, you can also apply color chips for it to it for extra personalization. Now honestly, if you want to go for completion all the way to the skin, some of them do pull off this skin very nicely. Arc Beetle, for instance, and even Smilodon do rock it pretty well, but the skins are not fully required. They are simply an additional reward to say, well done for making it this far, here's an extra reward for your troubles, and enjoy your tune-up points. But These particular skins are not going anywhere. They are not limited. They are not one time. So if you do choose to start working on a Medarot that has the tune-up system applied to it, do not be in a rush to go after this skin. It will not be going anywhere. It will be there for you when you meet the requirement. In addition, this also applies per part. So say if you complete 100% on, for example, Cross's legs, you will unlock the tune-up skin for his legs only. So if you want the full skin of his tune-up treatment, you have to go and complete the other 3 parts, his head and arms, at 100% as well. Now, the general idea, this was the biggest question that I've seen asked, as well as a lot of difficulty explaining with in-game menus, and that is exactly what exactly are the missions, and what do the missions entail, what are they, how do you complete them? Because there are some missions that look relatively straightforward at first glance with a translation, but then don't exactly make it clear over how exactly to complete it due to a key phrase being lost in translation. But a general overview of the missions themselves are actually very easy. Because of this, it does make the grind just a little bit easier as long as you know what you're doing. But some of the missions, as you see here, a general overview include use a part on a certain terrain a certain number of times, use part number of times in battle, use part without it being destroyed while on a field. This can also be a certain number of times. Use a part and accrue a certain amount of damage. This is primarily geared toward head and arms, obviously, because they're the only parts that can deal damage. Complete a successful heat cool, or generally a back and forth turn, using this part or upon using this part. Very simple, very straightforward. And with legs in particular, sometimes they will have an evade mission, which is simply evade attacks a certain number of times. This one may be a little trickier to complete because evading is a very hit and miss accomplishment in and of itself, so putting missions on it really doesn't make it any easier to obtain either. Now, there are variants of these, however, that include using them with EX trials, which, if you're using Google Lens or DeepL, will translate to Super Invasion, as well as the same requirements used for online PvP, which is usually geared to encourage more activity in it. Now, ultimately, the variants of these two honestly go back to the same general list, so theoretically, on paper at least, the missions themselves are really not all that hard. It's simply just use the part over and over, use the part and accrue damage, complete a turn without it being destroyed, win a battle without being broken. Really easy stuff, honestly. But it's just mostly the wording that makes it kind of tricky to obtain. And it's mostly at that point you want to just double check, say if you're using Google Lens for your translations, copy the phrase and maybe run it through DeepL or another translation service, or even a buddy if they're versed in Japanese, just to make sure that you understand clearly what the mission is looking for, so that you can complete it and not waste all your energy and find out what happened, why is this mission not completed. Now, with all the niceties and offerings that the TuneUp system can offer, there was a pretty fair amount of controversy with the TuneUp system upon its initial release that has made a lot of players not really want to complete it or even not bother with it as a whole, or even say that it is a very bad mechanic. And some of those controversies include the initial release was not hyped as promised. They did release this upon the debut of the Ghost in the Shell 2022 Rerun collaboration, where they introduced Takanome and Makaizo Thing as new models and new skins and such. They decided to release this mechanic in tandem with that as a way to further encourage people going after the first 3, which were Nines Leader, Muscleborg, and Oil Clay, or for folks that already had them to encourage using those models above others for better bonuses and essentially knock a 2 birds with 1 stone kind of thing. Unfortunately, that did not quite go as planned, and with initial release it was even more so grind heavy than it was before, which led to a lot of frustration with players. I did touch on this ever so briefly with my concern video to Imagineer a few weeks back, but not a lot of details were actually given at the time. In addition to this, numerous players have also complained about the difficulty of missions upon the initial release of the mechanic. A lot of missions, for instance, involve dodging a lot, where dodging is nearly impossible for a lot of heavy set legs, or accruing certain number of damage, or doing it without parts being broken, which made it even more of a pain to have to complete on top of the regular farming. Now, however, A couple weeks into the initial release of the tune-up mechanic, Imagineer has actually stated that they have noticed the trend in particular complaints when it comes to the tune-up mechanic. And so they released a survey a number of weeks ago asking players what exactly needs to be fixed with the mechanic and what can they do to make it better. So basically, after taking about a week and a half, 2 weeks of taking answers, they did finally come forward and say, we asked, you spoke, and we heard you. And as a result of this, as a permanent thing going forward, some of the changes that they made as of 6/16/22, so not too long after the initial survey and the very large negative feedback of the mechanic, some of the changes that they were implementing include capping the max tune-up point collection to 1,000 per part, whereas originally it was only 800. As a result of this, even though there were more points having to be earned, you can now the missions were made much easier to obtain, and thus the farming was a lot more worth the time. In addition, EX trial missions or super invasion missions were made a little easier to complete, and thus allowed the completion from most standard EX trials, and not exclusive ones such as collaborations where they have to be farmed endlessly to complete them. PvP and Meta League missions were also greatly reduced, or the number of missions that required those in a tune-up list were greatly reduced and made easier to complete, going back to the list as before if you need to go back and double check it. And then last but not least, dodge missions for legs also were greatly reduced. This was another major complaint that players had, as dodging by itself, like I said, is a trick and a half, and more often than not, something that you don't want to rely on when it comes to fighting, because unless you have someone built exclusively for dodge, they're probably never ever going to do it, except on very rare occasions, or in cases where they say overlevel and overpower their opponent, which is particularly rare, especially in PvP or EX trial super invasions, where they are equal to your level or even higher, especially with overclocked metals. So it is good to hear that Imagineer has listened in this case and decided and were able to make the changes to make the mechanic easier to farm. Now with this, however, does actually come another gift from me that will be added to the channel permanently going forward, and that is a new playlist of my Robattle analytics showcasing a regraded playlist of the bots that are getting the treatment. Simply put, this is simply where I go back and revisit bots that I have previously covered in a Robattle analytics, as well as I regrade them and offer tune-up point recommendations so that you can allot your points for the most efficient payouts to make the most of the bot, as well as new grades, both pure set and mixed score, that reflect based on the tune-up features that I recommend, or just that are offered to them as a whole. So do stay tuned for those going forward. I will try to record the rest of these wherever I can to catch up, as there's only about 10 bots right now, which is pretty easy to make. And going forward, I will be committing to this and to adding to those upgrades, and maybe doing my recommendations where possible. Ultimately, as some closing thoughts though on the tune-up points system, just know going in it is very grind heavy, so don't rush it. This is something that you ultimately just want to take in your free time, if you're not doing anything or if there's no event going on at the time. With this, earning TP will take a while, like I said, so don't rush it. Some missions may be limited, but they will cycle with the TP dungeon that I mentioned prior, as the weeks cycle, and you can just complete it on the certain terrain that is required. Now, with this as well, they did also mention that events also count toward tune-up missions as limited ones. So if there is an event ongoing and you already have your bonus builds built out, see if you can factor a tune-up part in there every here or there, and see if maybe you could knock out 2 birds with 1 stone if you want to maximize your efficiency with this. Some missions, however, are truly limited. This is primarily for collaboration models specifically. The Ghost in the Shell collaboration and the Omega Sisters, as of current anyway, only apply to this rule. And once this does come out, you will essentially have to pay rubies to force completion, because naturally the mission closed, you are not able to complete it going forward. I did touch on this briefly, but I will touch on it again as a recap. Choose your upgrades wisely. It is very, very expensive to reset a part's tune-up back to normal, so that you can redistribute points. 10 rubies reminder if you want to reset a part, which means if you want to completely rebuild a bot, that is 40 rubies that you'll be down the hole that you could have used towards, say, a gacha pull in a collaboration or a banner that you've been waiting on. In addition to this, the maximum amount of points is 1,000 going forward. The only models that really did get the 800 treatment are mostly just the Ghost in the Shell collab models, which include Nines Leader, Muscleborg, and Oil Clay. But going forward, the 1,000 will be the permanent end cap that all tune-up models and tune-up parts can reach as a cap. Fast tracking, I have mentioned this before and alluded to it, is very, very expensive. So this is something you really don't want to spend a lot of rubies on unless you really can't help it, as honestly, fast tracking and buying completion isn't worth it for about 90% of the missions, because they are relatively easy to obtain, and with enough patience, you can complete them very easily. However, there are some missions that buying completion is worth it, such as, say, online PvP missions. This one in particular, I've seen a lot of complaints on because they most often require you to actually have a victory in order for the mission to count. Whereas they have stated in the recent updates and reworking of the system, as long as you use the part, it will count toward most of them unless it specifically applies and asks for a victory. Those are still very grind heavy as a whole, and for those reasons, if you want to pay a ruby or two towards getting those done, I really won't judge you, and honestly, I really don't think anyone will, because it is a very difficult and grind heavy mission to complete, on top of an already very grind heavy mechanic as a whole. But with ultimate effort versus reward, this is where the controversy comes in, and the ultimate value of the tune-up system is still relatively debatable, as I still believe that Imagineer is trying to find that sweet spot and balance between effort versus reward to make it grind heavy, but not enough that it's an absolute slogfest to go through. Some upgrades, however, that are offered on bots are huge game changers that make it 110% worth it, and as such actually greatly improve and very largely change my initial grades, as you will see and are reflected when I do the regraded playlist and episodes. For instance, some examples include Arcbeetle, who not only has access to an additional head charge to the prominence, but also gets access to up to 200 additional points to his legs mobility, which is a huge game changer for him since one of his biggest weaknesses was primarily his low speed. Now, tuning up to max, going up all the way to 1,000 points, is not necessary. If you feel that going up to, say, 600 or 800 is where you want to stop, that is completely your choice. Just know ahead of time that if you do comp it all the way up to 1,000, you do have that bonus skin available to you as additional reward. It does not do anything to performance, it is strictly just a cosmetic thing and a more or less kind of a trophy to say it's complete, well done. Now, one other question people may ask, you do not have to have parts capped at level 90 to unlock the tune-up system. So, any bots going forward, as long as you have them collected, the tune-up system is available to you automatically, because the buffs that they offer will continue to stay and stack on top of the standard leveling going forward. But with all this, I believe that covers just about everything for this episode and general crash course of the tune-up system. The general breakdown, like I said, is it is very grind heavy, so just be wary of that, but it does honestly offer a lot of nice bonuses that will make it worthwhile if you do choose to go after it on your own time, whenever you're not doing anything or if there isn't an event going on. But with that being said, I do appreciate you all for stopping by once again. I do hope that this 101 in particular was a little enlightening on how exactly the tune-up system works, as it has been riddled with a lot of uncertainty and controversy that made completing it a little bit of a chore. But that being said, if you would like to know more, you can follow me below on Facebook at the Medarot News Network page and the Metabots Forever communities there. You can also join us on Discord in the link provided, just to keep a closer ear to the ground and keep up with anything related to Medarot with the community. And we are also an international community, so if you don't speak English, or if you're Japanese, Spanish, wherever you may be or wherever you come from, you are always welcome within the community, and we are always happy to see more fellow Metarotters join. You can also reach out to me personally on Twitter at IsagamIKura, so if you have any questions, feedback, comments, or suggestions, that is definitely the best place to reach out and get a hold of me, or even mention something I may have perhaps missed or should cover in future episodes, whether that be my 101s or just my weekly episodes as something I could consider, or even if you just want to reach out and ask something. My DMs are always open for that very reason, and don't be a stranger and feel free to say hi. If you have any questions on that as well, feel free to reach out either in the comments below, or privately via Discord, or even on Twitter in my DMs, and I'm more than happy to try to respond wherever I can. But that being said, I do appreciate y'all for stopping by once again. I do hope this 101 has been enlightening and will assist you in tuning up your bots going forward with the best buffs possible. Until next time.